There's been a lot of really interesting work in this area, and I just want to highlight a couple of examples from the textbook. So one section that I'm really happy with is the early portion of Volume 1, where we talk about American history to 1500. And historians are increasingly willing to look at non-textual sources, so things like archaeology and oral history and maps. And those kinds of sources can help tell a story that's much richer than what we had before. And you can certainly see that on display here. So one of the things that we bring up is the diversity of roles that Native people had. So they weren't just hunters or gatherers, they were also farmers and fishermen, or fisher people, I should probably say, and even city dwellers. So there were Native American cities before Columbus. Also, you asked about race and slavery. So a really big intervention in the scholarship in the last 15 years, I'd say, is the revelation that Native people were some of the first slaves taken by Europeans in the Americas. And throughout the colonial period, from 1492 up till 1850s, there were 3 to 5 million Native people taken as slaves in the Americas. So this is really a slave trade of hemispheric proportions that connected Native people in really dangerous and deadly ways to the global economy. So that is, slavery initially did not settle just on African people, but on a wider spectrum of people. It wasn't really until the early 1700s, after rivalries with Indian nations created colonial wars, that planters increasingly turned to African Americans as slaves. But even then, that happened mostly on the eastern seaboard, and the Indian slave trade continued throughout much of the continent until the late 19th century. So that, for example, really changes the way that we think about race and slavery in North America. On a related note, one of the things that we want to bring out is how the violence of colonialism impacts Native communities. And another piece of data that's clear from work on the Indian slave trade is that it's not just diseases that really impacted Native people and proved so devastating to their numbers. It's those diseases were compounded by violence from warfare and from slavery that really significantly contributed to mortality. So that's like a missing piece of the puzzle that makes the picture of the devastation of early Native communities much different than the way it used to be. At the same time, again, Native people found ways to survive. And an example that we bring out of that is the Plains Indians in the 18th century. So these are people who actually adopted European technologies like the horse and firearms to develop a really viable economy in bison hunting that lasted until the mid-1900s. So we see in these volumes how Native people are really impacted negatively by globalization and colonialism, but at the same time, they creatively respond to it, they survive. Well, I think it changes their view of early American history in 3 ways. So the first way is, who are early Americans? And for a long time, this question really focused on British settlers on the East Coast. But the new view of early American history is really continental. So it includes Native people, it includes diverse colonizers, that's French, Spanish, even Russian colonists. And that continental view gives us a much more diverse and complex picture of what America really is and what its origins are. And on a related note, where is early America? Again, like we used to look at these places like Massachusetts and Virginia, which we obviously still do, but we also look at places like colonial San Antonio, right, or the California mission system. And finally, I think that the story of early America itself changes because it's no longer a group of Anglos who arrive on the East Coast and face west to try to conquer a continent. What we see instead is that they're competing nations and empires that try to implement their own visions for the future. And that isn't necessarily always a straightforward path to freedom, right? So this is a much more kind of dynamic story of give and take, and of the ways that people have tried to secure autonomy and prosperity, sometimes in the face of great challenges.